The morning light was unforgiving. It cut through the heavy velvet curtains of the penthouse suite, hitting my eyes with the force of a physical blow. My head felt like it had been used for percussion practice, and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and spilled gin. I sat up, the silk sheets sliding down my skin. This wasn't my apartment. My apartment didn't have a view of the skyline, and it certainly didn't have Mr. Hans, the coldest, most demanding CEO in the city, passed out in a heap of tangled linen next to me. The great escape. The memories of the Lumina Company holiday party were a blurred montage. 10 p.m. Mr. Hans handed me a drink, his eyes less icy than usual. 11:30 p.m. Laughing at a joke he made, a rare, genuine sound. 1 a.m. Blank. Absolute silence. Panicked, I scanned the room. My clothes were a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the door. I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't be here when he woke up. I couldn't look into those steel gray eyes and wonder if I still had a job, or if I had lost something much more significant. I dressed in a blur, my fingers shaking as I buttoned my shirt. In my haste to vanish, I didn't notice the soft, discarded fabric of my pajamas tangled in the duvet. I just ran. The aftermath. 3 hours later, Mr. Hans stirred. The silence of the room was heavy. He reached out a hand, expecting to find the warmth of the person who had finally cracked his composure the night before. Instead, he found only a lingering scent of vanilla and the silk top I'd left behind. He didn't call the office to check the morning stocks. He didn't ask for his coffee. He simply picked up the fabric, his fingers tracing the hem where I'd stitched a small, clumsy V. A slow, dark smile pulled at his lips, a look that would have terrified any of his competitors. "You can run, little secretary," he whispered to the empty room, pressing the fabric to his face. "But you left a piece of yourself behind, and I'm not very good at letting go of what belongs to me." The air in the Lumina Company's executive suite was perpetually thin, filtered through high-efficiency vents and the even higher expectations of Julian Hans. As his private secretary, my life was a rhythmic, frantic dance of anticipating his moods before they manifested and solving crises before they dared to breathe. He was a man of architectural precision, sharp-jawed, impeccably tailored, and possessing a gaze that could freeze the humidity in a room. The annual gala at his private estate was supposed to be the culmination of a grueling fiscal year. I expected the usual: the clinking of crystal, the vapid murmur of stakeholders, and Mr. Hans standing at the center of it all like a marble statue of a god from a forgotten, harsher era. The night of fracture glass. The shift began with a single glass of vintage Burgundy. Mr. Hans, usually a bastion of sobriety and restraint, had an uncharacteristic glint in his eye. Perhaps it was the victory of the Lumina merger, or perhaps it was the way the moonlight hit the terrace, but he invited me to join him, not as a subordinate, but as a guest. The evening dissolved into a kaleidoscope of blurred impressions. The heat of the ballroom, the intoxicating scent of sandalwood that clung to his skin, and the terrifyingly beautiful way he looked when he finally shed the mask of the cold so. We drank until the world tilted, until the professional barriers I'd spent years erecting crumbled into dust that I woke to a silence so profound it felt heavy. My head throbbed with a rhythmic, dull ache, a souvenir of our shared indulgence. As my eyes adjusted to the opulent dimness of the master suite, the reality of my surroundings crashed down upon me. This was not my cramped studio apartment. This was the inner sanctum. The room was a battlefield of discarded luxury. My dress shirt lay crumpled near a mahogany dresser. My slacks were draped haphazardly over a velvet chaise. And there, beside me, lay the source of my impending professional ruin. Mr. Hans was submerged in a deep, rhythmic slumber. In sleep, the cruelty that usually sharpened his features had softened, leaving behind a face that was hauntingly handsome. I stared at him, my mind a frantic void of lost memories. What had we done? What had I said? The terror of the unknown was more potent than the hangover. Driven by a primal need for self-preservation, I moved with the stealth of a ghost. I gathered my belongings, my breath hitching every time he shifted in his sleep. In my desperation to vanish before the sun fully claimed the horizon, I didn't notice the soft, silken bundle of my pajamas. The one thing I had changed into during the hazy midnight hours, entangled within the Egyptian cotton sheets. I fled the estate, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a single, intimate piece of evidence. The obsession of Julian Hans. When Julian finally stirred, the coldness had returned, but it was now tempered by a strange, burning focus. He reached for the warmth that had been there hours before, only to find the bed vacant. His jaw tightened. He was a man who took what he wanted, and he had never been abandoned, especially not by a mere secretary. Then he felt it. A wisp of fabric caught against his hand. He pulled the discarded pajamas from the sheets, the scent of my soap still clinging to the fibers. It was a mundane object, yet in this room of gold and marble, it looked like a trophy. He didn't feel anger. He felt a predatory spark of interest. The subordinate who had always been so meticulously invisible had finally left a mark. He pressed the silk to his lips, his eyes darkening with a possessive intensity that would have made me tremble had I seen it. I had thought I was escaping a mistake, but I had accidentally ignited a fixation. To Julian Hans, the hunt was always more exhilarating than the capture. And now, he had the perfect scent to follow. The next chapter. The atmosphere at the Lumina Company is about to become suffocatingly intimate. Should we explore the first Monday morning back at the office, where Julian calls you in for a private briefing, while your pajamas sit prominently on his desk, or should we skip to a corporate retreat where he ensures you are never more than an arm's length away? The following Monday, the glass towers of the Lumina Company felt less like a workplace and more like a gilded cage. I moved through the lobby with a gait that felt unnaturally stiff, my heart performing a frantic staccato against my ribs. I had donned my most austere suit, a charcoal armor designed to signal professional distance. But beneath the wool, my skin felt raw, sensitized by the memory of the previous night's proximity. I reached the executive floor, the silent elevator doors parting to reveal the expansive, minimalist purgatory where I spent my days. My desk sat like a lonely island outside his double mahogany doors. I braced myself, clutching a tablet as if it were a shield, and entered his sanctum to deliver the morning's briefing. The presence of the predator. Julian Hans was silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning sun casting a harsh, golden outline around his broad shoulders. He didn't turn when I entered. The silence stretched, elastic and agonizing, until it threatened to snap. The quarterly projections are ready for your review, Mr. Hans, I stammered, my voice betraying a microscopic tremor. And you have a 10 o'clock conference call with the London branch. He turned slowly. His expression was a masterpiece of inscrutable calm, yet his eyes, those predatory, slate-gray depths, tracked my every movement with a new, terrifying hunger. He didn't look at the tablet. He looked at the hollow of my throat, where my pulse was visible and erratic. You left quite abruptly, Elias, he murmured. The use of my first name was a calculated violation of our established boundaries. One might even say you fled. I didn't wish to overstay my welcome, sir. The party had concluded, and I assumed my presence was no longer required. The token of subjugation. Julian moved with a predatory grace, rounding the desk until he was inches away. The scent of his sandalwood cologne enveloped me, a sensory tether to the night before. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small, shimmering bundle of silk. My breath hitched. There they were. My pajamas, neatly folded, looking entirely out of place amidst the high-stakes documents and expensive fountain pens. You left this, he said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly timbre. He didn't hand them back. Instead, he let his thumb graze the fabric, his gaze never leaving mine. I found it nestled in my sheets. It smells of you. It's distracting. I apologize, sir. I'll take them in. No. He pulled the fabric back just as I reached for it. I think I'll keep them here. A reminder of the tasks we have yet to complete. You see, Elias, I've found that my interest in you has transitioned from professional appreciation to a profound, singular obsession. The new directive. He leaned in, his lips hovering mere centimeters from my ear. The heat radiating from him was a physical weight. From this moment forward, your duties have expanded, he whispered, the threat and the promise intertwined. You will not leave this office until I do. You will dine where I dine. And should you choose to run again, remember that I have already tasted your surrender. I am a man of immense patience, but I do not lose what I have claimed. He stepped back, the icy mask sliding back into place, as if the intimate exchange had been a fever dream. Now, about those quarterly projections. See, we have much to discuss. The looming shadow. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I wasn't just his secretary anymore. I was a marked man, caught in the crosshairs of a billionaire who treated human emotion like a hostile takeover. The atmosphere within the Lumina executive suite had grown claustrophobic, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and the impending deluge of a late autumn storm. Outside, the skyline of the city was periodically illuminated by jagged veins of lightning, turning the glass walls into mirrors that reflected the simmering tension within. It was nearly midnight. The rest of the building was a tomb of darkened cubicles, yet the lights in Julian's office remained defiantly bright. I sat at the small mahogany table he had moved into his office, a workstation that placed me perpetually within his line of sight, my fingers hovering uselessly over the keyboard. The symphony of the storm. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic scratching of Julian's fountain pen and the low, guttural growl of thunder. I could feel his gaze on me, a physical weight that made the hair on my arm stand on end. Every time I looked up, he was there, watching me with a calculated, predatory stillness. "You're distracted, Elias," he noted, his voice a low vibration that seemed to resonate through the floorboards. "It's the storm, sir. The weather makes it difficult to focus on the logistics reports." Julian stood, his movements fluid and leisurely, like a panther deciding the hunt had gone on long enough. He bypassed the reports and walked to the sideboard, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. He didn't offer me a glass. Instead, he walked toward me, the ice clinking with a sound like shattering glass. The reclaiming. He stopped behind my chair. I froze, my breath hitching as I felt the warmth of his body radiating against my back. He leaned down, placing his hands on the edge of the table, effectively pinning me between his arms and the mahogany. "Is it the storm?" he whispered, his breath ghosting against the sensitive skin of my neck. "Or is it the memory of what happened the last time we were alone in the dark?" I told you I don't remember much of that night." I lied, my voice cracking under the pressure of his proximity. "A pity," he murmured. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and produced that familiar wisp of silk, the pajamas I had abandoned in my flight. He draped them over my shoulder, the fabric a cold, mocking reminder of my vulnerability. "Perhaps I should assist your recollection." With a sudden, deliberate movement, he swiveled my chair around to face him. He didn't let go of the armrests. He leaned in until our foreheads were nearly touching, his slate-gray eyes burning with a dark, unyielding intensity. "That night, you weren't my secretary," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register. "You were vibrant. You were defiant. And you looked at me as if I were the only man in the world who mattered. I have spent a fortune building an empire of stone and glass, Elias, but I find I would trade it all for that look again." The rain finally began to lash against the windows, a frantic, rhythmic drumming that mirrored the pounding of my heart. Julian reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with agonizing slowness. "It wasn't a caress. It was a claim. You think that by running, you maintained your dignity," he continued, his gaze dropping to my lips. "But all you did was prove that you belong in my orbit. You left your scent in my bed, your clothes in my hands, and your image in my mind. Now, tell me, do you truly wish to go home to your empty apartment? Or shall we finish what the wine started?" He didn't wait for an answer. He tilted my head back, his grip firm yet strangely reverent, and for a moment, the cold so was gone, replaced by a man who was utterly consumed by the person sitting before him. The point of no return. The line between professional duty and personal obsession has been irrevocably blurred. As the storm rages outside, The sanctuary of the office has become a theater of whispered confessions and mounting desire. The tempest outside reached its crescendo, a symphonic battering of rain against the reinforced glass that served only to insulate the electric silence between us. Julian's hand remained anchored on the back of my chair, but the predatory edge in his eyes began to fracture, revealing a vulnerability that no ledger or hostile takeover could ever catalog. The softening of the stone. "I didn't keep these because I wanted to trap you, Elias," Julian murmured, his voice losing its serrated edge. He picked up the silk pajamas from my shoulder, his fingers lingering on the fabric with a tenderness that bordered on reverence. "I kept them because for the first time in 10 years, I woke up in a room that didn't feel like a mausoleum. And then I realized the warmth wasn't from the silk. It was from you." The confession hung in the air, heavier than the thunder. I looked up at him, this titan of industry who had spent his life meticulously crafting an armor of ice, and saw the exhaustion behind the brilliance. He wasn't a predator hovering over prey. He was a man terrified of returning to the cold. "You don't have to use tasks to keep me here, Julian," I said, my voice finally finding its steady ground. I reached out, my fingers tentatively covering his hand on the armrest. "I didn't run because I wanted to leave you. I ran because I didn't think I was allowed to stay." The new contract. The tension that had stretched between us for months finally snapped, not with a break but with a release. Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the night of the gala. He pulled me into a slow, deliberate embrace, burying his face in the crook of my neck. There was no demand for surrender, only the quiet, mutual acknowledgement of a shared anchor. "The office is closed, Elias," he whispered against my skin, his grip tightening just enough to be grounding. "No more briefings. No more power plays. Just stay. Not as my secretary, just as you." I leaned into him, the scent of sandalwood and rain finally feeling like home. The cold was gone, melted away by the very warmth he had tried so hard to claim. The dawn after the storm. Hours later, the storm had retreated to a rhythmic drizzle. The harsh fluorescent lights of the executive suite were extinguished, replaced by the soft, amber glow of the desk lamp. We didn't leave for the penthouse or my studio. We simply sat together on the wide velvet sofa, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars below us. Julian had draped his heavy cashmere overcoat over my shoulders, and his head rested on my shoulder, his fingers laced firmly through mine. The silk pajamas, the catalyst of our chaotic dance, lay forgotten on the mahogany desk, no longer a trophy of obsession, but a relic of the moment everything changed. The tempest outside reached its crescendo, a symphonic battering of rain against the reinforced glass that served only to insulate the electric silence between us. Julian's hand remained anchored on the back of my chair, but the predatory edge in his eyes began to fracture, revealing a vulnerability that no ledger or hostile takeover could ever catalog. The softening of the stone. "I didn't keep these because I wanted to trap you, Elias," Julian murmured, his voice losing its serrated edge. He picked up the silk pajamas from my shoulder, his fingers lingering on the fabric with a tenderness that bordered on reverence. "I kept them because for the first time in 10 years, I woke up in a room that didn't feel like a mausoleum. And then I realized the warmth wasn't from the silk. It was from you." The confession hung in the air, heavier than the thunder. I looked up at him, this titan of industry who had spent his life meticulously crafting an armor of ice, and saw the exhaustion behind the brilliance. He wasn't a predator hovering over prey. He was a man terrified of returning to the cold. "You don't have to use tasks to keep me here, Julian," I said, my voice finally finding its steady ground. I reached out, my fingers tentatively covering his hand on the armrest. "I didn't run because I wanted to leave you. I ran because I didn't think I was allowed to stay." The new contract. The tension that had stretched between us for months finally snapped, not with a break but with a release. Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the night of the gala. He pulled me into a slow, deliberate embrace, burying his face in the crook of my neck. There was no demand for surrender, only the quiet, mutual acknowledgement of a shared anchor. "The office is closed, Elias," he whispered against my skin, his grip tightening just enough to be grounding. No more briefings. No more power plays. Just stay. Not as my secretary. Just as you. I leaned into him, the scent of sandalwood and rain finally feeling like home. The cold so was gone, melted away by the very warmth he had tried so hard to claim. The dawn after the storm. Hours later, the storm had retreated to a rhythmic drizzle. The harsh fluorescent lights of the executive suite were extinguished, replaced by the soft, amber glow of the desk lamp. We didn't leave for the penthouse or my studio. We simply sat together on the wide velvet sofa, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars below us. Julian had draped his heavy cashmere overcoat over my shoulders, and his head rested on my shoulder, his fingers laced firmly through mine. The silk pajamas, the catalyst of our chaotic dance, lay forgotten on the mahogany desk, no longer a trophy of obsession, but a relic of the moment everything changed. Tomorrow, Julian murmured sleepily, we're hiring a new secretary. I find I'm much too fond of mine to let him work for me anymore. I laughed, a soft sound that echoed through the quiet office. And what will I do instead? Julian tilted his head up, his eyes reflecting a soft, genuine light I had never seen before. Whatever you want, as long as you're there when I wake up. No more running. As the first gray light of dawn began to touch the horizon, the Lumina Company stood silent. The hierarchy had dissolved, the obsession had transformed into a steady, quiet devotion. And for the first time in both our lives, the future didn't look like a mountain to climb. It looked like a path to walk together.